Have you ever caught yourself standing at the threshold of a new stage in life and wondering why certain connections, interactions, and obligations that once felt so essential now feel like burdens on your peace of mind? This question has been on my heart for quite some time, and it has shaped how I view myself, my time, and my relationships now that I am 65. Reaching this age ushers in a tapestry of realizations that feel simultaneously comforting and startling, enlightening and humbling. The truth is, we inevitably learn to see the world differently when the horizon of our lives comes into sharper focus. The shift isn't just about counting the number of days we might have left. It's also about recognizing how precious each of those days is and deciding, often for the first time without reservation, to protect that preciousness with all we have. In my case, this awareness has led me to choose solitude more often and to step back from certain people, not out of resentment, but out of a deep desire to value myself, my well-being, and my time. When I was younger, I automatically said yes to nearly every invitation and every request for help. If a friend needed a shoulder to cry on, I offered both shoulders without a second thought. If family called, I came running, even if it meant sacrificing something that mattered to me. There was an inherent belief that being available to others at all times was a virtue, that it was a mark of my good character. And, to be fair, there was a unique kind of satisfaction in being seen as the dependable friend, the supportive neighbor, the self-sacrificing family member. The idea that someone relied on me felt good. I was needed. Yet, over the years, I noticed a pattern. I felt exhausted. My calendar was perpetually full, and my energy frequently dipped to new lows. Even more troubling, I found my emotional reserves were often running on empty. I'd stay up late consoling someone, or commit to a gathering I dreaded, only to realize after the fact that I was getting almost nothing in return for all that investment of energy and empathy. The older I got, the harder it became to ignore this imbalance. Reaching my mid-60s was like turning on a bright flashlight in a dark room. Suddenly I could see, with stark clarity, just how many relationships in my life felt one-sided. It wasn't that all these connections were toxic, or that the people were malicious. Many of them were simply used to the dynamic of me always giving, always adjusting my schedule, always being the caretaker or the solution finder. And I allowed this dynamic to continue for decades, telling myself that good people show up without complaint. If you had asked me at the time whether I felt taken advantage of, I might have said no. Deep down, though, I felt a quiet dissatisfaction gnawing at me. Still, in my younger years, I had more stamina, emotional, mental, and physical, to power through those frustrations. As the decades rolled on, I came to see that some of these connections were not only draining but often overshadowed the genuine connections that gave me warmth, kindness, and reciprocity. The quality of my time with the people who truly mattered, those who genuinely uplifted me, was diluted by the obligations I upheld toward those who demanded more than they ever returned. Eventually, as I neared 65, I found myself reflecting on the simple yet profound idea that time is truly finite. Now, I know that's not a revelation in itself. We hear it all our lives, from greeting card aphorisms to solemn reflections in church sermons. But there's a stark difference between hearing it and living it, between theoretically knowing your time is limited and feeling it in your bones. One day, I woke up and thought, the horizon is closer than it used to be, and that horizon is precious. No matter how healthy I stay or how lucky I am, I no longer assume I can just wait for someday to do what matters. I can't blindly give away my hours, days, and years to relationships and situations that don't nourish my spirit. These realizations are not about fear of mortality, but about a kind of gentle urgency to live intentionally and meaningfully. It's worth noting that stepping back from certain people does not stem from bitterness. At 65, bitterness is the last thing I want in my life. I've made peace with many of my past disappointments and heartbreaks. They taught me lessons about boundaries, empathy, and self-worth. Instead, I've realized that not every connection, no matter how long I've had it, remains relevant to who I am today. Growth is not a straight line. People evolve in different directions. Some relationships become stronger and deeper, while others fall away from alignment. Accepting this ebb and flow is a huge part of emotional maturity, and it becomes more natural as we collect the experiences that shape us. At this stage, I give myself permission to let certain connections go, not from anger, but because they simply no longer fit in the life I'm trying to build. Another key aspect is time's increasing preciousness. In my 20s and 30s, I could spend whole afternoons engaging in small talk that never went anywhere. I went to events I didn't care about because it seemed important to be polite. But somewhere in my 50s, I realized that a day spent doing something I didn't value was a day less to do what truly brought me joy. Instead of feeling guilty for turning down an invitation or leaving a conversation that felt shallow, I felt a certain relief. When you learn to guard your own time, you start to understand just how finite it is and how essential it is to fill it with people, experiences, and pursuits that resonate with your core values. That might mean focusing on a beloved hobby, volunteering in a cause that matters to you, or simply enjoying a peaceful cup of coffee on the porch without the hustle of forced socialization. Speaking of forced socialization, many of us grew up in an era where it was considered rude to say no. We were taught that turning someone down could damage a friendship, or that stepping back from a family member might be seen as betrayal. It's only as I got older that I realized it is okay. Actually, it's healthy to say, "I'm sorry, I can't make it," or "I need some quiet time for myself right now," or "I'm not comfortable continuing this relationship." The fear of missing out or the fear of letting others down used to loom large in my mind. But as we gain perspective on how fleeting life can be, we come to recognize that sometimes it's necessary to set boundaries. Each boundary, in turn, safeguards our energy and emotional health. This ties into another central factor. Relationships change because we change. It's easy to think the only constant in life is change itself, yet many of us resist it because it can bring uncertainty or grief. But the truth is, we are not the same people we were at 20 or 30 or 40. Our priorities evolve, our tolerances shift, and the things that once gave us a thrill might now leave us cold. We also become more acutely aware of what we will and will not tolerate in how others treat us. Sometimes, we find ourselves drifting apart from friends who remain stuck in old patterns we've outgrown. And that's okay. That space doesn't have to be filled with regret or animosity. Instead, it can be a gentle acceptance that we each have our path, and sometimes those paths diverge. For instance, I've gone through my fair share of disappointments. I once had a close friend who lit up my days with companionship and laughter. Over time, as we both navigated life's ups and downs, I realized our bond was deeply rooted in convenience and habit rather than genuine understanding and mutual support. Once we both changed in ways the other person didn't fully understand, the friendship took a strain. I poured energy into trying to patch it, but it became apparent that our foundation had cracks that couldn't simply be filled with nostalgia. Letting go was initially painful, but in hindsight, it cleared space for more authentic connections. This is just one example of many that taught me how essential it is to reflect on the nature of our attachments. Trust plays a huge role in all this. Trust is so delicate, a facet of relationships that, once broken, rarely returns to its original form. In my younger years, I was quick to trust. I believed in the goodness of people and tended to brush off red flags. Now, I've learned to take my time, to watch for consistent actions rather than sweet words, and to protect my peace. This doesn't mean I live in a state of suspicion. Far from it. There are many kind, genuine individuals in the world, and I've been blessed to know some of them deeply. But I've become careful with my trust, not because I'm bitter, but because I've earned the right to be discerning. The heartbreaks, betrayals, or disappointments I've lived through have shaped me to be wise about who I open my heart to, not necessarily closed off to everyone. The changing world around me also influenced why I step back from certain connections. It's hard to deny that our modern era feels louder and faster than the one I grew up in. Technology has gifted us with remarkable conveniences like video calls with relatives far away, but it has also introduced an unending stream of notifications, social media comparisons, and shallow digital interactions that seldom lead to real depth. There was a time when neighbors knew each other not just by name, but by heart. You could pop by unannounced for a cup of coffee and spend an hour or two talking about life without glancing at the clock or the phone. That pace is rarer these days. Life's accelerated churn can make meaningful interaction even more precious. In many ways, this realization is yet another reason to choose my connections deliberately. Why invest my limited energy into encounters that feel rushed or forced when I can opt for the quieter, more intimate moments with people who truly value me? Embracing solitude is a natural extension of this. Some hear the phrase, "I avoid people," and assume it's a declaration of isolation or a statement of bitterness. But that's not how I see it at all. For me, solitude is not loneliness. It's a deliberate, self-affirming choice. In solitude, I find clarity and calm that allows me to appreciate life's small wonders. The way morning sunlight filters through the curtains, the rhythmic sound of rain tapping on the rooftop, the satisfaction of finishing a favorite book. When I allow myself to rest in my own company, I tap into a deeper sense of who I am beyond all the roles I've played. Mother, father, friend, sibling, spouse, colleague, and I reconnect with the simple essence of being human. I no longer conflate an empty calendar with an empty life. In fact, an open schedule can be a source of immense freedom and creativity. If you, reading this now, find yourself in your 60s or beyond, you might have encountered the same sense of introspection. You might see your reflection in my story. Decades spent tending to others, ignoring your own boundaries, or feeling guilty for yearning for solitude. Perhaps you've reached a point where you wish to spend your days immersed in pursuits that nourish you. Painting, gardening, traveling, or simply savoring the hush of early morning. These aren't empty or selfish desires. They're the natural result of wisdom gained through a lifetime of trial and error, heartbreak, and jubilation. Each disappointment taught us how to protect ourselves. Each success showed us the rewards of investing deeply in what truly matters. Now that we're older, we see time differently, and that perspective grants us a special type of clarity. I also want to reassure those who think that by stepping away from certain people, they're somehow doing something wrong or harmful. It isn't about proclaiming, "I'm done with you, good riddance." It's more like quietly saying, "I choose to devote myself to what strengthens me, rather than weakens me." The relationships that truly matter remain. The smaller circle I have now is more meaningful than any larger circle I had in the past, because it consists of people who actually listen, empathize, and care about my well-being. And in return, I share my love, concern, and time with them wholeheartedly, because it doesn't feel draining. It feels mutual. I come away from those interactions with a sense of fulfillment, not depletion. That's a major victory in itself, and it's something I couldn't have achieved if I were still trying to keep up with a broad but superficial network of acquaintances. There's another aspect to consider. The illusions we carry about what it means to live fully often revolve around a hustle and bustle mentality, especially in modern cultures that prize productivity and social connectivity. We can fall into the trap of equating being busy with being successful, or being socially active with being loved. But the older I get, the more I see that genuine fulfillment doesn't necessarily arise from running around. Instead, it often arrives in those moments when you're content, unhurried, and at peace with yourself. Perhaps you're savoring a good meal with a dear friend who knows your soul, or sitting in a park alone with a journal, pouring out your thoughts. Maybe you found a small group, a grandchild, a niece, a treasured friend, who genuinely cherishes your presence. You realize, in those moments, that you don't need a large crowd to validate who you are. You just need authenticity and warmth, and often those qualities are best nurtured in small, intimate settings. I've spoken with numerous friends my age and even a bit older, and we frequently discover this shared perspective. It's not that we dislike people or that we're giving up on connection. It's that we finally learned how to choose quality over quantity. We do this with possessions too, often downsizing our homes, clearing out closets, and letting go of items we no longer need. We're drawn to simplicity because we understand that our contentment doesn't come from collecting things or collecting acquaintances. It comes from making space for what truly aligns with our hearts. This parallels how we handle relationships. The superficial connections might have served a purpose in our youth. Maybe they taught us social skills, brought fleeting excitement, or gave us lessons in empathy. But now, we're drawn to the relationships that reflect our true selves, those that offer genuine camaraderie or uplifting companionship. The decision to be more selective also connects to the idea of trust. After experiences of betrayal or disappointment, it's natural to be guarded. We look for consistency in actions, not just nice words. That might mean letting new people into our circle much more gradually. It might involve stepping away from a longtime friend or relative whose behaviors or values we've outgrown. This is, in many ways, an act of self-care. We're no longer willing to endure heartbreak just to maintain appearances or avoid rocking the boat. We see that the price of allowing people into our inner sanctum is high, so we require they meet our standards of respect, empathy, and genuine interest. If they don't, we graciously bow out of deeper entanglements. I know for some people, especially those who are younger, my perspective might come across as cynical or lonely, but I assure you, it's neither. If you're in your 30s or 40s, you might still feel like you have endless time to connect with everyone, be everywhere, do everything, say yes to every social engagement that comes your way. That's a season of life with its own joy and vibrancy. Yet, I'd encourage you even then to think carefully about where your energy goes. You don't have to wait until 65 to set boundaries and refine your relationships. If you do it earlier, you might find yourself freer, more peaceful, and more fulfilled at any age. For those of us who have walked this path for 6 decades or more, the lessons feel especially urgent. We no longer want to spend our precious hours on engagements that don't feed our souls. That's where this mindset of avoiding people comes from. A deep desire to be at peace rather than a need to hide from the world. At this point, you might wonder if I never feel lonely. The truth is, loneliness can strike any of us, at any age, in any life circumstance. But for me, solitude and loneliness are not the same. If I choose to spend a day reading, reflecting, or enjoying the silence of my home, I don't experience that as loneliness. It feels more like a gentle coming back to myself, an uncluttered sanctuary. I don't have to worry about small talk or put on a polite face. I can simply be. Conversely, there have been times I felt lonely in a crowded room, forced to maintain conversations about topics that held no significance for me, or among acquaintances who didn't truly see me. That kind of loneliness is far more painful than any quiet afternoon spent alone. The difference now is that I'm better at recognizing situations that make me feel lonely or emotionally drained, and I avoid them. If there's a large social gathering that I know will leave me tired and disconnected, I give myself permission to decline. It doesn't mean I'll say no to every invite. Sometimes, I love a good celebration or a family get-together, but I understand my limits and I honor them. That process isn't just about self-protection. It's also about ensuring that when I do show up, I show up wholeheartedly with genuine enthusiasm. By limiting superficial connections, I nurture deeper presence and warmth in the interactions that truly matter. This perspective extends into how I use technology. I'm not anti-technology by any means. Being able to video call my grandchildren is a precious gift. Having the ability to send a quick message to a faraway friend is a wonderful convenience. But I am wary of letting digital noise replace real conversation or fill my day with pings and beeps that distract me from the tranquility I cherish. Even on social media, I've learned to be selective, to curate the kind of content I see so that it nurtures rather than agitates me. A barrage of negativity, arguments, or superficial content robs me of the serenity that I now value above so many other things. This, too, is part of avoiding people. It's not just physical avoidance. Sometimes it's about limiting online influences that steal my peace. One question I often get is whether this approach means I've become jaded. My response is a resounding no. If anything, I feel more open-hearted now than I did when I was younger. Back then, I rushed around from one social commitment to the next, seldom delving deeply into my own emotional state. Nowadays, by being more intentional in what I do and who I spend time with, I find I have more compassion and genuine care to offer in those relationships that truly count. I can sit with a friend and be fully present to hear her troubles. I can support a family member without feeling that it's draining my last emotional reserves. There's a certain calm in knowing that I've filtered out the unnecessary and can direct my energies where they're most impactful. Sometimes, people at my age worry that stepping away from certain connections means they'll be forgotten, or that they might lose a safety net for the future. I understand that concern. We're told that we need to maintain all these ties because you never know who you might need or when. But I've found that investing in a few deep, caring relationships yields far more security than sustaining dozens of tenuous ones. The people who genuinely care about you will be there, regardless of whether you attend every event or meet every peripheral acquaintance's demands. And if you give them your best self, rested, calm, content, they will appreciate that version of you much more than a stressed, overextended one. In turn, they'll offer genuine support when you need it. That's real safety, grounded in authenticity, rather than in maintaining superficial networks. Stepping away from certain connections can be bittersweet. I won't lie and say it's all relief and liberation. Sometimes, I think about friends from my past and feel a touch of nostalgia. We shared good times, laughter, dreams, and I cherish those memories. But life changes, and people drift apart naturally. Accepting that drift for what it is, instead of fighting to keep something afloat that might have served its purpose, is an act of self-respect. I can look back on old friendships with gratitude. They shaped me, taught me about friendship and loyalty, and sometimes taught me what not to do in future relationships. When I release them with love, acknowledging that some connections were never meant to span the entirety of our lives. In the grander scheme, I see this stage of life as a new beginning rather than an ending. Society often frames our 60s and beyond as a time of winding down, but I see it as a chapter of incredible personal freedom. I'm not rushing to build a career or juggle young children. I have the privilege of drawing from a lifetime of experience to chart the final, or perhaps the penultimate, chapters of my story. If that means I spend my days with a small handful of cherished people, plus plenty of reflective alone time, so be it. If that means I choose to say no to social gatherings that don't nourish my spirit, that's okay. If that means I trust slowly and carefully, it's not a flaw but a testament to my wisdom. And if you happen to be in a younger season of life and this resonates, take heart. You don't have to wait until 65 to adopt these principles. You can learn from those who've walked ahead and apply the lessons earlier, freeing yourself from decades of unnecessary strain. It takes courage to go against the grain, to decline invites, to let go of relationships that hold you back, and to spend time in solitude that others might misinterpret. But I promise that those who love you will respect your boundaries, and you'll discover a deeper self-awareness and peace that's worth far more than superficial popularity. I also want to touch on something that might concern some of you. How do we handle family relationships in this new perspective? Family can be particularly tricky because society tells us that we should always be there for them no matter what. But sometimes, certain family ties can be more draining than any other. I've had periods where I felt obligations tied me to relatives who were consistently negative, manipulative, or uninterested in respecting my well-being. Learning to set boundaries, even with family, can be one of the most liberating acts we can do. It doesn't mean we cut off all contact. It might just mean we limit the frequency or intensity of interactions. We decide how much of our emotional bandwidth we can offer without harming ourselves. Letting go of guilt in these situations is essential. We can love family from a distance if that's what it takes to maintain our peace. As for solitude, I want to reiterate that it's a beautiful choice, not a sentence handed down by circumstance. Solitude has given me room to savor the small details of life that once passed me by unnoticed. I linger over a sunrise. I allow myself the luxury of sitting quietly with a cup of tea, reflecting on the life I've lived and the one I hope to live in whatever time remains. I walk in the park without any rush, letting the shifting seasons soothe me. I can pick up a painting brush, write in a journal, learn a new recipe, or indulge in an afternoon nap simply because it feels right. In my younger years, I might have done some of these things, but always with an eye on the clock, an eye on the next commitment. Now, I give myself completely to the moment, and that is an immeasurable gift. For those concerned that stepping back might lead to regret, I can only speak for myself, but regret usually arises when we feel we've missed out on what truly matters. When we are staying true to ourselves, valuing our peace, and honoring connections that truly nourish our spirits, regret doesn't factor in. Yes, there might be sadness if we see an old friend drift away, but sadness and regret aren't the same. Sadness acknowledges a loss, while regret implies we should have done something else. And in many of these cases, stepping back is the healthiest choice we can make for ourselves. I've found that the serenity of a balanced, self-respecting life far outweighs any fleeting pangs of what if. Let's not forget that this stage of life can also bring unexpected joys. For instance, Having more free time can open doors to forming new friendships with people who share our current interests. Sometimes, you meet someone at a local class or community event who feels like a kindred spirit. You find yourself talking about art, nature, or personal philosophies in a way that energizes you. That's the magic of letting go of energy-draining relationships. You create the space to welcome new, refreshing connections. These new bonds might not have the decades-long history of old friendships, but they can bring a kind of excitement, reminding you that growth is always possible, and that your capacity to forge meaningful relationships doesn't wane with age unless you want it to. I've also realized how important it is to share these reflections. That's one reason I'm grateful for avenues like the Candle of Wisdom channel, where I can speak openly about these experiences, hoping to inspire or reassure someone who is walking a similar path. There is a certain solidarity in knowing you're not the only one choosing to prioritize peace over obligation, solitude over forced company, depth over breadth. The number of people who resonate with this message is testament to how universal it is to reach a point where we yearn for a simpler life. If you find yourself nodding along, you're not isolated in your feelings. Many of us cross this threshold and discover the same truths. This doesn't mean I never step out of my comfort zone. I'm not advocating a hermit-like existence, unless that's truly what you want. I still cherish meaningful gatherings, intimate dinners, or an occasional celebration. But I choose those moments strategically, based on genuine desire rather than obligation. I prioritize experiences that align with my values and bring authentic joy. Striking that balance between connectedness and solitude has become an art form, one I'm still learning. Some days, I misjudge and overextend myself, then I need extra time to recover. But mistakes are a natural part of growth, even at 65. And yes, there are days I ask myself, should I have learned this sooner? Possibly. But I remind myself that every lesson arrives in its own time. I had to walk through the decades of being the ever-available friend, the caretaker, the yes person, to reach a tipping point where I recognized the harm in ignoring my own needs. That journey molded me into someone who now values solitude, sets healthy boundaries, and invests wholeheartedly in the few precious relationships that genuinely matter. Without that earlier experience, I might not fully appreciate the freedom I have today. For me, the bottom line is this: life in our 60s and beyond can be a season of deep authenticity if we allow it to be. We've hopefully laid down the burdens of trying to impress everyone. We've seen enough to know that regrets often stem from living someone else's version of our life. We trust our intuition more, and we're less susceptible to guilt trips or manipulations. That doesn't mean we're perfect, but it does mean we give ourselves permission to do what's best for us, even if it looks like avoiding people on the surface. Underneath that phrase lies a more nuanced truth. We're choosing to treasure our time, our emotional well-being, and our personal growth. We're not shutting out the world. We're inviting only those parts of the world that respect and appreciate who we've become. I hope that if you're reading this, no matter your age, you'll take a moment to reflect on your own life and think about the people or obligations that feel draining. Could you create more space for peace and self-discovery by saying no sometimes? Is there an activity you keep doing purely out of habit or external pressure? Is there a relationship that has run its course and needs to be kindly let go? You might find it scary at first, but my experience has been that once you start setting these boundaries, a wave of relief often follows, and with relief comes a quieter sort of happiness. Let me also assure you that if you're making these choices, you're not heartless or uncaring. Quite the contrary. You're taking care of yourself so you can be the best version of you for those who genuinely matter, those who love you for who you are, not for what you do for them. And in doing so, you set a healthy example for younger generations who might be drowning in social obligations or constant connectivity. You show them that there's a path to a simpler, more fulfilled life, one that doesn't revolve around pleasing everyone else at your own expense. As I've said, life at 65 feels like a precious gift. Each sunrise can be a moment of gratitude, each conversation with a genuine friend a treasure. The only limit is how we choose to spend the hours we're given. I choose to spend them intentionally, even if that means my days are quieter and my circle is smaller. To me, that quiet smallness pulses with authenticity and contentment. And if that resonates with you, know that you're not alone in that pursuit. There's a whole community of us learning to cherish solitude, to cultivate meaningful bonds, and to let go of the rest. Thank you for taking this journey with me, for diving into these reflections on aging, time, relationships, and the courage it takes to create boundaries that protect our peace. If you found value in these musings, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the Candle of Wisdom channel, where we continue exploring perspectives that foster a simpler and more fulfilling life. Together, we can share insights about what it means to live authentically and, in turn, encourage one another on the paths we've chosen, however unconventional they might seem to the outside world. Until then, I hope you can find moments of stillness to appreciate your own life, rediscover parts of yourself you may have overlooked, and invite only those connections that uplift you. After all, there's such a beauty in recognizing that our worth isn't measured by the quantity of our social engagements, but by the quality of our days and the depth of our peace. See you in the next video.